This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 260, The Great Gatsby. Welcome to Talking Drupal. 1 year, almost to the day, we recorded episode 224 with Shane Thomas and Grant Glidewell about Gatsby. Today, we talk with Shane again about what is new with Gatsby's integration with Drupal. To get started, let's introduce our guest. Today with us, we have Shane Thomas, engineer at Gatsby, founder of Code Karate, and coming to us live from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Also with us, as usual, we have Stephen Cross. Stephen, what's going on with you?
Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, Steven's having some mic issues, so we might ask Steven quite a few times throughout the show if we can he can hear us and we can hear him.
Yeah, nothing really is new with me. It's interesting. We did when we did the show last week with Greg and Damien. Greg had mentioned during his little brief update that he had started playing chess or learned how to play chess or got back to it, and I was like, "Oh, that's such a good idea!" So I installed or renewed my subscription to the Internet Chess Club over the week and have been playing every day. So I thank Greg for putting that little tickle in my brain. So it's been fun to do that again.
You're playing online? Are you playing via tablet or on your computer? Or?
Yes.
All of the above.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been playing mostly the computer the last few days just to get myself sort of in some sort of playing mode again. Not that I was ever a really good player or anything, but the internet.
And is it
the Internet Chess Club allows you to play with people online?
Is it sit down and play a game for an hour, or is it make a turn and then go away and come back 20 minutes, an hour later, make another move?
No, they're all timed.
Chess with friends.
They're all timed games.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so even if you're playing against the computer, it's a timed game. So
do you get the satisfaction of hitting the clock?
No, you don't get that satisfaction. You just make the move and your turn is over and the clock switches. Yeah.
All right. Well,
yeah.
Nick, what's going on with you?
Took last Friday off. I actually decided to take every Friday of the month of August off. As you know, it's been a little over a year since I took a vacation. It's time for me to take a vacation. Definitely needed it. But usually when I take a vacation, I go somewhere. But with coronavirus, there's really nowhere to go. And, the thought of kind of just staying home for a week straight, since considering we've been staying home this whole time, didn't really appeal. So I thought I'd kind of split the difference, take a couple of long weekends in a row, see how it goes. I was kind of inspired by you, Steven. I think you mentioned you did it last year in passing, and I thought that'd be a good idea. Last week was the first week I did it. Definitely felt better coming into work the next, this last Monday. So far, it's going well.
You should take your vacation budget and go buy Legos with it, and every Friday you can do a Lego.
Maybe. We'll see what I do with it. I mean, to be honest, when you're self-employed, the vacation budget is you not working when you're on vacation. So it's kind of what I'm doing with it. But it was good to have some time off, decompress. I'd say the biggest problem with it is usually when you have a vacation, it's you kind of have to build up to it. You prepare for it. You tell your clients, I'm taking the next week off. It's very much front of mind. And this one, because it's just a long weekend, I keep forgetting. I'm I'll do that Friday. I'll do that tomorrow. And even today, I was trying to finish something, and it's getting a little later in the day. I was I'll just pick it up tomorrow. And then remembered 15 minutes later that I'm not working tomorrow.
You're I'm going to be working late tonight.
That was the best thing I did, Nick, last year. I did it for all of July and August. And since Erica's a school teacher, she's off all summer. So we had basically 3 days together for 8 weeks. So it was really awesome. I loved it. I would have done it again this year, except I had to take this Arizona trip. So there's no way I could have done that this year.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, I'm definitely thinking about trying to incorporate this in, like, even when I can get back to traveling, maybe because usually even when I travel, I just take a week. And I could use more vacation than a week a year. So maybe I'll split the difference like that, do a week-long vacation somewhere, and then one month a year, just take off every Friday.
Yeah.
So see how it goes. So far, I'm enjoying it. And, I start, if something comes up, then I could work still. It's not like I'm
exactly
traveling and
that happened to me too. I think maybe 1 or 2 Fridays I ended up working because something came up at the office.
Yeah.
That was still
but even then, even if you only work a couple hours, it's, you're still relaxing some. So I'm enjoying it. Yeah. How about you, John? What's new with you this week?
Well, I got a little bit of a PSA. It's about taking care of yourself. There's a history of colon cancer in my family. My dad had colon cancer, and when that's the case, you are lucky because you get to get a colonoscopy 10 years earlier than anybody else. So I'm now 36, and yesterday I went and had a colonoscopy, and it's a procedure. They knock you out for it, but it's super important to making sure you're healthy. So I just wanted to tell our listeners out there that you should make sure you're taking care of yourself. It's not as scary as it seems. Hospital staff was super nice. Hospital was like super clean. All of the procedures and protocols are in place to keep you feeling safe. And it's super important to get those checks every so often to make sure you're going to be around for a good long time. So doesn't have to just be
I think
colonoscopy. It could be a variety of other types of tests, but get them done.
Yeah, I think one of the important things about that is it's one of those diseases that if you catch it early, it's super treatable, super easy to take care of. But one of the reasons why it's so devastating is usually it doesn't get caught until it's very advanced. So it's one of those things that might be a little uncomfortable, but like you said, it's easy to take care of.
Super not uncomfortable though. The prep is a little bit daunting, but ultimately, like, they knock you out. You sleeping, you wake up, you're like, all right, I'm ready to go. They're like, hey, we're all done, man. And I will say, if you're good to go. You only have to do it every 10 years, so it's not that big a deal. Shane, what about you? Anything going on there in Sioux Falls?
Kind of go with Nick's idea of taking some time off. So I took a few days off this week, which I haven't done in a while because it's, being home much more often than normal. Haven't really felt the need to, but my family has a cabin not too far from here. So I was able to drive up there. It's kind of isolated and just spent a little time on the lake and put my computer away for a few days and didn't look at it, which was, a rare occurrence, but kind of a nice thing.
Cabin in the woods sounds lovely.
Yeah, it's not really in the woods, but during the week, there's never anyone up there. It's busier on the weekends, but pretty much spent a few days, had some fun, relaxed a little bit.
Water sports?
Rode a jet ski around a little bit.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's the one thing. If I ever, make it big or get to retirement, I'm going to buy a jet ski. Those things are fun as heck.
Yeah, no, a lot of fun. I also appreciate the colonoscopy comments. I have a family history of it as well, and I'm about 2 years out from having to go through the same thing. So
yeah, my primary care doc, he basically was doing a countdown every year at my physical. I was like, all right, doc, I get it, man. Like, I get it. He's like, just get it done. I'm like, okay, I'm going to get it done. Easy. Like,
yeah. Well, like Nick said, super preventable if you catch it early enough. So it's better to stay on top of it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's all that I really had going on besides just, working like everyone else here, probably spending a lot of time behind the screen.
Hey, in the last show, John discussed his sabbatical and his big challenge for himself during the month of August. John, you want to recap us on what that challenge is?
Yeah, I'm really terrible at reading books. So I'm off for 4 weeks and I am going to try to read a book, which I'm doing very well at, I might add. I'm up to halfway through chapter 2. So
Is that 70 pages?
I thought it was only 40 pages. Was it 70 pages? That means I'm behind. That means I'm behind pace. I got to catch up.
Yeah, we calculated
70 pages a week.
Yeah, 70 pages a week to finish the book by.
I thought it was 40. All right. Well, after this, I'll read a couple more pages.
Well, we got a good deal for you because we have the author joining us, who's Jonna Bacon. He's going to be joining us on September 24th to talk about the book. So you get an extra 3 weeks to finish it. How does that sound?
That's great. And I'll tell you, I'm already not to give the hard sell here, but I'm in chapter 2, halfway through chapter 2, and I'm like, I have all of these great ideas of how this information can help could help me, could help Oomph, could help Drupal, could help the world. It's really thought-provoking stuff. So I recommend reading it highly, and I'm only on the second chapter.
Yeah, so if you're interested in the book, it's about community and how community powers business. The author is an interesting guy. He used to be the community lead for Canonical and Ubuntu. So he's like an open source advocate, and it's going to be great to have him on the show.
Yeah, when I read he was involved with Linux, I was like, Steven and Nick are going to love this guy.
That's what pushed me over the edge to reach out to him.
I know. I know what drives you. Don't worry.
Okay. So we have a link to the book in the show notes. If you want to go pick it up and get it read by September 24th, we can field some of your questions for when he's on the show.
We also have a couple of stories for you this week. The first one is kind of a follow-on from something kind of mentioned in passing a bit last week. So the Drupal Association released the latest blog post in their series on the Developer Tools Initiative. They sort of released a beta of the merge request flow for some high-profile modules. So I think we're getting close to having the patch workflow being replaced with a more modern GitLab merge workflow. So very, very exciting news. We'll have the blog post in the show notes. It's a pretty quick read. There's a short section on Drupal spoons, talking about how they've made some discoveries as well. So hopefully this project becomes more public very soon.
Our second story is about Drupal Association board elections for 2020. Nominations are open. You have until the 27th of August, depending on when you're listening to this, to nominate somebody or yourself. But this year, they're doing something a little bit different. And this year and every year going forward, as it says, they are requiring you to have a Drupal Association membership in order to vote. And that's interesting. There was a lot of back and forth on Twitter about the requirement to be a paying member of the Drupal Association in order to vote. And, I talked about it with Nick and Steve. And, personally, I kind of had mixed feelings on it. I saw both sides of why, having a membership in order to vote was important. And then I also understood some of the folks on Twitter who were talking about, open source and it being open to everybody to vote on. So I still myself haven't really come down on which side I agree with, but it's an interesting debate, and I think it's gonna lead to interesting results.
The piece of the debate that I'm not following, and maybe you could explain it to me, John, is the association doesn't control the open source project. All it does is help facilitate the pieces around the open source project that help make it successful. So it doesn't really impact Drupal itself. So what is I don't quite follow the people who are against it. Maybe I
think the feeling there is that, open source, just like the internet, is free and open. And by forcing somebody to pay for a membership, granted, there are various different levels of membership, but forcing somebody to pay for a membership in order to have a vote is contradictory to that open source nature, right? So, I also can understand, the other side of that is if you're a paying member of the Drupal Association, you have a vested interest in who's on the board, who's helping the organization to succeed. So, I can see that side as well. But yeah, basically it feels a little anti-open source to say, hey, we're going to basically put a paywall up for these elections. Which I've now used that word, and I fear I'll be quoted for it, but that's essentially what it is, right?
I mean, I think the argument more is that it was never a requirement before, so you're restricting access to voting more than you did in the past.
Right, but I wonder.
I think that's the big concern.
I wonder on that, like looking at that though, right? Like, so if it was open to everybody, like how many people were just voting because, oh, I've heard of that person. Oh, I'm going to vote for them. Like, it's easy. It's very easy to put a vote in when you don't necessarily have to stake anything on it, right? So like if a friend of yours is running and you weren't really involved in Drupal, you could sign up for an account and vote for your friend, right, to help them out. But now and this is what I mean by like a vested interest, if you're a Drupal Association member, you're paying a membership fee, right? Based on that, I would assume that you're vested in the Drupal Association, the Drupal community. And now you're probably going to make more of a educated vote. You might still vote for your friend if like, oh, hey, this person's there. I like this person. They do good stuff. Vote for them. But I guess what I mean is you're more vested in the community if you're a member of the association.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of I don't know that I agree with all of that. And also, I mean, $5, even though it's $5 a year, $5 can be a big barrier to people around the world. There might be people that are invested in the Drupal community, but they just can't justify that, and now that's a barrier for them. And they may spend more time deciding in who they think they should vote for than somebody who's paying $1,000 a year for an enterprise, an organizational account.
It's super interesting you say that, Nick, because again, going back to John O. Bacon's book, right? One of the things that he in the first chapter they talk about is somebody who traveled great distance to be part of a community, right? So in your examples exactly that. If you don't have a lot of money and you can't afford the association membership, but you're still very much involved in the community, it seems a little unfair to kind of put up that barrier for people, for somebody to vote.
I also think it's a poor argument to say it's never been like that before, so we shouldn't evolve as an organization.
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, things change.
Yeah,
that's progress. Things change. But I do, Nick brings up a great point to somebody that is, it becomes a burden, right? It becomes a financial burden to have to pay a membership to the Drupal Association, even $5.
Yep.
I think that's, that enough is a barrier. It'd be interesting to see. I don't know if they do scholarships for membership or not. I don't know that, but
interesting. So let's move on. What do you say?
Absolutely.
Sure.
So Shane, thanks for joining us again. The last time you were with us, you were working for Third and Grove. And I don't think it's been recently, maybe January, February, you moved over to Gatsby. Maybe you could tell us about, the move over to Gatsby and what you're doing over there and how it's going.
Yeah, absolutely. So previously last year around this time, I was working with Third and Grove and spending quite a bit of time working with Gatsby projects, both at Third and Grove and individually, and got to know quite a few people on the Gatsby team. And through that, formed some pretty good relationships. Obviously, I really liked the technology, which is why I was promoting it so heavily last year at on this podcast and in quite a few conferences. And so the opportunity came up where they were looking for a more dedicated Drupal developer on staff to help make the integration with Gatsby and Drupal significantly better, which is something I had been working on anyways, kind of on my own time and with Third and Grove. So it kind of made a lot of sense to me. It was a good fit. And so now I'm part of the Gatsby open source software team. So essentially what I do most of the time is just figure out ways and to work with the community and work with Gatsby and Drupal to make the two play nice together or to integrate better with each other. I also do some other integration work with Shopify and a few other, content sources, but primarily it's mostly Drupal most of the time.
So Shane, is it fair to say that this is a dream job for you?
I would say I definitely enjoy my job. Yeah. It was a really good opportunity, and I definitely couldn't turn it down.
It's funny. A couple of years ago, I was talking with Shane at a conference, and I like in my head, I was like, "Man, Shane should go work for Gatsby. He talks about Gatsby all the time. This guy really loves Gatsby." I'm like, "What are these guys waiting for?" And then, I don't know, a year later, however long ago it was, he was like, "Oh, I'm moving to Gatsby," and I was like, "Yeah, that's right."
Yeah.
So I think it was New England Drupal camp. Stephen called me the Gatsby guy or something. Yeah. I remember. I think that was you, Stephen. So it was. I guess you were predicting the future before it happened.
So we had talked about in the intro how in 224 you were here with Grant talking about Gatsby, but for this episode right here, can you actually just refresh our listeners' memories on what Gatsby is?
Yeah. So the formal definition of Gatsby is it's a React-based open source framework for creating websites and apps. So if you look on gatsbyjs.com, that's what you're going to see. But essentially, it's a way to pull in content from anywhere and build really fast, highly performant, scalable websites. So it's really, if you're coming from the Drupal world, which I was, I've been in Drupal for a decade plus now. It's the ecosystem of plugins is very similar to Drupal's ecosystem of modules and themes. So it starts to feel a little bit like home. I mean, it is different. It's much more, React-based or modern JavaScript-based than Drupal, of course. But the ability to use Drupal as your kind of content system and pull in content into a Gatsby front-end website is a really cool, powerful experience. And so that's what really drew me in. But essentially, it's a way to build a kind of a static by default website or app, and you can obviously add in the dynamic elements. So it's fast by default. It's really performant, and it helps you build really cool things that feel more like you're dealing with an app rather than dealing with a website.
So one of the things that you work on with the integration is there's a Drupal 8 module, Gatsby Live Preview and Incremental Builds. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of features that module provides and why did you start it?
Yeah, so this is actually something I had started working on with Grant as well as some of the other team members at Third and Grove when I was there. But one of the things that Gatsby has, and this is one of the things that you have to learn when you first start building Gatsby site, is there's this build process because it takes in your content and it builds this static website. And so when it is static, then you run into some different interesting problems that you don't think about until you have the website up and you're deploying it and you want to then change that content later. One of the first things is if you have ever built a Drupal site, you know that the ability to quickly and easily edit your content is very important. And that's kind of a hard experience with the Gatsby site because it's static. So what this module does is it allows you to the first step is to integrate in that live preview experience so your content editor can change something on the Drupal site just like they normally would, and then immediately see a live preview of what that content's going to look like when it's rebuilt and deployed out to your actual live website. So that's kind of the first big feature. And that existed, and I think we talked about that last year when I was on the podcast, and that was kind of one of the big things that was available then. But recently, in probably the last couple months, Incremental Builds has been launched, and that, if you've ever built a large Gatsby website, you can know that the build times sometimes take 5-10 minutes, even upwards of 20 or 30 minutes on really large sites. So what Incremental Builds allows you to do is it only builds the content that's changed. So if you go in and you edit a blog post or an article or a page, there's really no reason to rebuild the entire site. You only need to rebuild the parts of the site that display that page, whether it's, like a view or a listing page or the actual page itself. So what Incremental Builds does, it only builds that portion of it. So now you can take what was maybe a 10 or 20-minute build time and turn it into less than 10 seconds.
This is kind of like the Drupal version of cache tags.
I mean, in a lot of ways, yeah, it kind of is. I mean, it's not implemented the same way, of course, but yeah, it's much more about caching and only changing what you need to change. So yeah, it essentially caches the build and then only pulls in what's changed since that last build, and then it has a reference to look up where does that content get used and only change those those pages. And then also on top of that, so Incremental Builds works on Gatsby Cloud, which is kind of like Gatsby's cloud hosting or cloud building service. So it allows you to do live previews in the cloud and incremental builds. So if you want to get fast build times locally, new in the RC2 version of the Gatsby module is something called Fast Builds, which does a lot of this local caching. And basically what it does on the Drupal side is it keeps a log of any entities that have changed. And then next time you sync your build, it'll only pull content that's changed since you last ran that build. So it can't quite get the 10-second build times of incremental builds, but it could probably turn a 10-minute build into less than a minute. So it's much, much faster. And then one other feature, and this is kind of the future, the currently in progress. One of the big things that I really like about Drupal is it's a flexible content management system. You can kind of piece things together through the UI and make complicated data types and your content structures. But what I've seen a lot of requests for is the ability for larger organizations, have one Drupal site that feeds into multiple Gatsby sites. Because a lot of these big organizations have a lot of web properties. It's not just one site. They might have a bunch of different products and they want a website for each of these products. So there's a new module it's going to be part of the Gatsby module. So it'll just be a sub module, but it's called Gatsby Endpoints. It's going to allow you to piece together and point and click and build these different, quote unquote endpoints that Gatsby can consume data from. So you might have certain content being fed to multiple Gatsby sites. So you can set up one content management system for your entire organization and then feed it into, 2 or 3 or 10 different Gatsby sites that only pulls in the content that that Gatsby site actually cares about. So that's kind of the future. Cool. Yeah, the future. What's in progress now, and hopefully will be released here in the next month or two. So,
there's as you're describing, I've played with Gatsby a little bit, never have built a project with it. So there's always these questions that are in my head. I'm going to throw a few questions at you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think this is a good point. I've gone a little bit off the show notes here with these questions. Is there a multi-language solution for Gatsby?
Not an officially supported way to do it yet, but yes, you can. There's many ways you can do it manually. A lot of things in Gatsby, because it's just like building a React project, you can do it. There is recently released. We have an I18N theme, Gatsby theme, which helps make a lot of this easier. So that's kind of one big step in that direction to having a internationalization within Gatsby core. So it's definitely on the roadmap to add future support. But on top of that, there's a couple different ways you can do it, whether it's having multiple language sites. Maybe you have, a completely different site for each language, or if you wanted, just at a subdirectory, you can pull in, you can pull in all the data from different languages and build the pages yourself. So long way around, it's certainly possible, but it's not quite as point and click as you can get say with Drupal out of the box.
Gotcha.
There's some extra work that has to be done to get it to work. But I think anyone who's worked on a multi-language project, it's never, even though Drupal makes it pretty easy, it's not easy.
No.
Yeah, it definitely takes some work.
So what percentage of Gatsby is on Drupal versus other projects? Do you have any sense of that?
So I don't have set percentages that I know of, but I know it's right now the percentage of Gatsby sites that use Drupal are probably a very small percentage. I would say probably less than 1%. A lot of Gatsby sites are, markdown blogs. and a lot of them use headless CMSs like Contentful, Dado CMS, Sanity, and there's a whole bunch of other headless CMSs that are used. That's predominantly most Gatsby sites. But as improvements to build times have been happening over the last year, more and more large sites that were on either WordPress or Drupal are starting to switch over to still using WordPress and Drupal for their content, but using Gatsby for the front end. So I think that number is going to increase going forward as, like I said, the build times and incremental builds are launched and things, it becomes more approachable for a large project, which a lot of Drupal 8 projects are larger scale content projects with, quite a bit of content. So a lot of these things had to be in place in order for it to be a little bit more approachable for something like a large scale Drupal project. And one of the other things I will say is Gatsby not too long ago released a site called Will It Build. It's just willit.build. And it shows a bunch of different data sources that can be used with Gatsby and different build times. You can see Drupal's obviously listed in there. But that's kind of how we track internally how fast things can build. And so we're consistently using that internally as our own metrics to improve our build times, because our goal is to be able to build a 100K content site, so 100,000 pieces of content in less than 10 seconds. So my question there on that site then is, why is everything 8,192 pages? So if you click on it, you can select different page sizes, and we started with I think 1024, 8,192, and then a 32,000 were kind of like the baseline benchmarks. But we started there because we knew that those are building, and then in the future we're continually adding to that site to make those. So right now the highest number is probably 32K, somewhere in that range. We're going to be eventually launching a 64K build times, and then so we kind of had to build the metrics. What gets measured gets improved, I guess. So there's our metrics, and then now we're going to continue to add to it over time and try to keep increasing the number of pages that we can build fast and make that public there.
So
makes sense.
What do you think the best projects to use Gatsby on are?
So really, it's kind of tough to say. They can be used across the board on a lot of different types of projects. So initially, Gatsby was used primarily on blogs, and then on more marketing sites, mostly static sites. But really, anything that you build with React. So if you ever created a project using Create React App, anything that you built with that, you could in theory build with Gatsby. Gatsby is kind of just a wrapper around React in a lot of ways. So it's just a framework on top of React. So anything that you could build with React, you could build with Gatsby. So if you had a site that was, a lot of static content, but also, some dynamic app-like elements, Gatsby could still be a really good fit for that as well.
So, would you suggest Gatsby for like an e-commerce site? I know back when Gatsby first came out, people were like, steer clear of the e-commerce. But now it sounds like it could be a little bit better at handling something like that.
Yep. Yeah, you definitely could do it. And there's, we have integrations with Shopify and BigCommerce and all those kind of hosted type of e-commerce solutions. There's also, and this isn't quite ready yet, but I've been working with some of the guys at Centauro, and there's a Drupal commerce solution that at least works, but it's not quite publicly ready yet.
We had Ryan and Matt on a couple episodes ago to tell us about that. We know they're working on that. So it's interesting to hear that, Gatsby can integrate with that as well as Shopify and some of the other e-commerce platforms.
Yeah, and I've been working with Matt, quite a bit on that, and I know it's something that's on his radar. So I would say it's still that's still like the next frontier for Gatsby to really approach is the e-commerce. So yes, I think it works really well, especially for kind of your basic smaller e-commerce sites. And I know there are some other bigger sites that have e-commerce that use Gatsby. I think one of the big showcase ones was like Little Caesars is one of the big Gatsby sites that, has obviously it's not just static content, but I think going forward in the future, you're going to see a lot more as things start to stabilize more and kind of the e-commerce realm. And I know that's a big focus for us this year, is really making e-commerce even better than it is now.
I will say Little Caesars loads very quickly. I could easily get a pizza on there within a minute, I bet.
So we've been hearing a lot about Gatsby over the last couple of years. If it's something that I want to evaluate for a project that's coming up, what's kind of the best way for me to get started? And if coming from the Drupal perspective, is there something in particular that I should be strong in if I'm going to be looking at it?
Well, I would certainly say if you're interested in digging into Gatsby, having some knowledge of React is helpful. It's a React-based framework, so knowing that and just knowing some more modern JavaScript. I know that was the biggest shift for me when coming from Gatsby, was just learning a little bit more about modern JavaScript in general and things that have changed in JavaScript in the last 10 years. I was very much invested in jQuery, and I thought pretty good with jQuery, and I think a lot of Drupal developers get pretty good with jQuery, and so you feel like you know JavaScript, and you do, but there are some different syntax things you need to learn when making the transition. So spending some time learning React or learning just some more of the modern JavaScript type of things was very helpful for me. I think that would be helpful for anyone coming from Drupal. Learning a little bit about GraphQL is also helpful as well. But honestly, if you go to GatsbyJS.com and use the getting started there, or I know the people from DrupalEyes.me have GatsbyGuides.com, and I think I'll say it was probably a year and a half ago when I really started digging into Gatsby, and I used that back then, and so I'm assuming it's still been improved, and I would say that's a good resource too if you're just looking to kind of dig in and you want to learn some of the modern JavaScript along with learning Gatsby. You can do some of it kind of in tandem. You don't necessarily have to learn one before the other. Just know that there's a decent amount to learn, but it's also pretty approachable from a developer experience side of things, where if you're going to build something pretty simple and you follow some of those guides, I think you can get something up and running pretty quick.
And I imagine since it's kind of a headless setup, it's pretty easy. Is it pretty well separated from whatever your Drupal development stack is? Like if you're using Lando versus DDev versus something else, Gatsby doesn't care as long as it has that endpoint, right?
Exactly. Yep. Basically, so if you have a Drupal site, let's say you had a local Drupal site you were building on, all you really need to do on the Drupal side of things is turn on JSON API, and then on your Gatsby site, add the Gatsby source Drupal plugin, and you enter a few variables in your config, in your Gatsby config file, and you can pull data just right away, right into Gatsby without having to do much configuration. So if you have a Drupal site you're not using sitting out there, just turn JSON API on. When you spin up your Gatsby site, there's just a few things you need to do to get that at least pulling in content so you can see it.
Is there, I know a while back, I think Benji Fisher had done some work on a Lando kind of recipe to build a Gatsby Drupal site. Has there been any more work on that, or is there a recommended way that Gatsby suggests using, like Gatsby Drupal with Lando?
So I think Benji actually updated that recently to add the Gatsby Drupal module into the stack. So I know I don't know the exact state of it. I just know he'd been reaching out for some questions as he was doing some updates. So if you're using Lando, that's a good way to do it. That being said, you don't necessarily have to. Gatsby doesn't necessarily care whether it's Lando or DDev or anything else. So you can also just run it locally, and it's not too difficult to do it that way. So it's really depending on how you want to set it up. What most people do is run their Drupal stack however they typically run it, and then they run their Gatsby site locally. But you can, of course, run your Gatsby site within Lando or within any other Docker container.
So you've mentioned a couple of times now that it's React-like, but it's also static. So, I mean, do you need a node server running to host this once it's been built, or is it static files you just throw up on a server?
Yep, it's just static files you throw up on a server. So you don't need a node process running in order to run it.
But you do need that for the build, I imagine.
Yes. So when you run your develop command or your build, there's a node server running. But once you build it, it's just static assets. So you just drop it out on a CDN somewhere, and I mean, that is one of the benefits is the hosting cost is significantly cheaper.
Does it work with like CloudFront and S3 hosting?
Yes.
I would
Yep.
imagine.
Yep.
Oh, so that's going to be super fast.
What are the things
Yeah,
that's
it's super fast. And the cool thing is the way it works is it's static files, but then we call it like rehydration, where essentially then it loads React. So originally this page itself is static, and then it rehydrates with React, so you can still do dynamic. If you needed to fetch, let's say using the e-commerce example, let's say you wanted your price to be loaded dynamically because you might have a special going on, or you might change the price. Well, 95% of the page is static content, and maybe that price is just a placeholder that when the page loads, it goes out to the server and grabs the current price and displays that. Like that could be a React component where the rest of the page is all static. That's just one example, but
and that
you can see how it could be used.
I think that's a great explanation there. And that when you say it grabs that price dynamically, doesn't necessarily mean that you have a Drupal database that it's accessing live. It just needs to get access to a JSON file, right, to grab that price, however that's generated.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
It could still be static.
It could be. Yeah. So I mean, it's really, and that could be pulling from a Drupal, database. Could be pulling from something, a JSON file somewhere that's static. Could be pulling from a Node server if you wanted to run, your site with a Node server. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can pull that data, but because it's just a React app at that point, it doesn't really care where the data is coming from.
Right.
You just configure it to pull from wherever it needs to be pulled from, wherever you're hosting it.
I've played around a lot with static site generators, and I actually built a small site about a month ago because I had a little spare time with Ghost. I don't know if you're familiar with Ghost CMS, which is static site generator. One of the things that's so frustrating to me all the time is there never seems to be a great solution for search. Is that still like one of the big problems is search? You have to go to a third party tool really to get any kind of searching.
I mean, there's a lot of different things you can integrate in with to make search better. I would say in a lot of cases you see third-party tools, but I would also say in a lot of the Drupal projects I worked on, we were using Solr or some other third-party search tool anyways.
Yep.
So while Drupal does give you search out of the box, and that works for smaller sites, I think a lot of large sites would use some kind of third-party search provider like Solr. So it's not necessarily that different from what you would see on a large-scale Drupal project anyways. But it is not as point and click and easy to set up. So there are some gotchas there, but there's there are plenty of Gatsby plugins that make integrating in quite a bit easier.
So is there anything else that we've not covered that you want to cover today, Shane?
Well, one of the cool things about Gatsby is it's always changing. So, it'd be cool to come back a year from now because I think there'd be a lot more to talk about. But some of the things, and I think this excites me coming from the Drupal world, and I think it'll excite a lot of others that are in Drupal is, so Gatsby has something called recipes, which we've released, which is kind of like a really easy way to add configurations of things. So it can download a bunch of different plugins. It can configure them in a different way. So it's kind of a pre-configured setup that makes it's almost like building blocks or Lego bricks, right? And if you've built with Drupal, sometimes it always felt like that to me. You're piecing together modules, you're going through an admin, you're clicking things around. Recipes is one step in that direction. Also, Gatsby Admins coming out, which is very similar in some ways to Drupal's admin UI, right? So you can piece together plugins and configure them through an admin rather than through a command line, which is how it's currently done. So that's exciting. And there's also, we're also working on Gatsby Desktop, which is kind of a desktop app. So you don't have to necessarily download and configure everything manually through a command line. It's a lot easier to set up, manage all your Gatsby sites, and it kind of integrates in with recipes and admin. So it makes it a much easier, much more approachable development environment where if you're coming from Drupal where you like to download modules from the UI and point and click and piece things together, it's going to feel a little bit more like home. I mean, you can still do it through the command line, but you don't necessarily have to. So I'm pretty excited about that because I think it's going to help the transition for people who are used to coming from WordPress and Drupal and used to having those nicer UIs that they can point and click and configure things. And then after you get used to doing it that way, you'll still be able to use the command line and kind of drop into it when you need to do more advanced type of things.
Well, before we close, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say, before we close out, I actually had a question that just kind of jumped out at me. How big is the company Gatsby?
So I don't know exactly. We're north of 50 people right now.
Okay.
So and I would say about a third of that maybe, and I'm just ballparking, are on the core open source team. I would say maybe a third to, not definitely not a half, but approaching there. So we have a pretty good sized, most of the company or most of the engineers are devoted towards the open source side of things, just working on the open source project. But then we also have engineers working on clouds and the cloud project or cloud offerings, and then as well as some of the other kind of newer features that are coming. So we kind of have, it's mostly engineering, but we also, of course, have what you'd expect of a company, the marketing side,
marketing, yep.
Yeah, all that, operations, things like that.
Makes sense. Well, thank you for joining us. Do you have any questions or feedback? You can reach out to us on Twitter at Talking Drupal. You can find us on Pound Talking Drupal, the Pound Talking Drupal channel on the Drupal Slack, or email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can also get show updates by signing up to our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter. I feel like every time I read this, I'm surprised at how many Talking Drupal's ads and newsletters are repeated. It's quite the tongue twister.
Nick, why don't you jump into the show template and clean that up?
Yeah, I was thinking that as I
did last week. I put some commas in there so it kind of flowed a little bit nicer. You don't have to say the hashtag when you're talking about Slack. People know.
I was just trying to avoid saying Talking Drupal channel on the Drupal.
I think that's good marketing, but I'm not sure. We also want to thank our patrons for their support of the show. It's greatly appreciated. If you're interested in being a patron, you can go to talkingdrupal.com and choose Become a Patron.
Well, Shane, thank you for joining us. As always, it's been a wonderful chat, learning about Gatsby and hearing about all the great things you guys are doing. If somebody had questions or wanted to reach out to you, how could they do that?
You can follow me on Twitter, smthomas3. Otherwise, if you are on Drupal Slack, there's a Gatsby channel. I'm Code Karate on Drupal Slack, so you can find me there, and it's a pretty good channel to get general Gatsby questions answered, or you can reach out to me directly through Drupal Slack.
And you could also wait 12 months and get your next dose of Shane and Gatsby 1 year from now.
Yeah, we're gonna have to get Shane back before 12 months. That feels like way too long. Nick, what about you?
You can reach me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And Steven?
I'm Steven Cross with a PH on Twitter.
And for all you lovely listeners, I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi. You can see the new Inc. website that is Gatsby and Contentful, sorry Drupal, at oomphinc.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
Take care, guys.
Thanks.
Have a good one.
Bye.